Thanks, Claire. And I guess that's a nice segue into the next section of this, which is the digital trade agenda. Chris, has COVID-19 accelerated the uptake and movement around digital trade, or is it all just hype?
Oh no, unquestionably, there's been a big movement towards digitization over recent years, no question about that. But what COVID has absolutely done is put rocket boosters under that agenda. It's hard to quantify that at the moment. We're looking at the situation right now, actually, as it happens, and getting a sort of state of play. But the data hasn't, there's always a lag period with the data. But what there is clear evidence of a real proliferation of initiatives, platforms, transformational projects, whether in companies or industries and sectors, and all sorts of countries, small, large, all regions, reforming laws. Places like Rwanda have gone cashless. Togo have done some really interesting stuff in terms of, pumping in public funding to support their SMEs using mobile technology. It's really innovative. It's a very innovative, dynamic environment, and I think all it does is it creates what I call a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, really, to rapidly modernize the laws, frameworks, laws and policy frameworks that would enable this growth. What is very clear is that the private sector is way out in front of where the regulators and governments are, and in many ways quite exposed. But if we're not careful, we're going to overcomplicate the market with more complexity. What we now need is more standardization, more open source platforms, more connectivity, so that companies can use the technology and the environment, whatever the jurisdiction, whatever the sector or industry they're in a more seamless fashion.
Thanks, Chris, and I have to give a small shout out to Emmanuel Gan at the WTO, and we'll be producing a report on a lot of these standardization and interoperability initiatives within the next couple of weeks or so. George, so I guess going into a bit more detail on these points. Where are the challenges? Are these projects interoperable, or do you also think that we are seeing digital islands and silos appear?
There is obviously a lot of work being done on digital. I don't think it is being addressed at the point which I've been speaking about around solving this portfolio problem, and it's quite a new idea, and it's not necessarily well understood or across the market. So there are clearly aside from the sort of blockchain hysteria that's in trade that's been around for a number of years, there are a number of programs, initiatives, all looking largely at digitalizing LC, bills of lading, the processing of trade finance, which is absolutely critical. And if we've learned anything out of COVID, and the physical lockdown of ports, that is the way that trade will go and needs to go, and we need to move away from the analog processes that have been around for decades, into digital. But if we can use that same digital technology to solve what is ultimately a data problem, either the DFIs and the multilaterals and even the banks who are willing to lend money into African trade, need to walk back from their evidential requirements of exactly where the money's going, or we need to solve what is a very large data problem, and clearly that the solution to that data problem just seems intuitively obvious, should be digital. At the moment, that is not being addressed by the community as a whole. And if we could pull together to get some kind of digital solution to curate these huge portfolios of very short-lived revolving MSME trade transactions into an evidential format that the credit or the liquidity providers were happy to say, I'm now confident that I understand that my support is going towards African trade finance. I can see all the details, and if we can rally together to do that, then that would be a huge step forward and would really, I think, make a big dent in the trade gap. The problem is that at the moment, the people who suffer that and the people who are supposed to be solving it are the last groups who should be doing that. They're African banks, small African banks, even regional African banks, trying to solve a global problem individually at the transactional level. So, if we could come together as a community and, harness the intent and support of the DFIs, along with global fintechs, global, IT companies, who would, be able to really make a difference. And they're clearly the right people with the right kind of technical expertise to solve this, on a global basis. That would, I think, pretty clearly be the way forward. But just hoping that individual banks are all going to come up with their individual responses in Africa and Southeast Asia and in the rest of the emerging markets is just not going to be successful.
Thanks, George. Very, very much a global response needed to some of these challenges. And actually a shout out to Matt Gamza at the SME Finance Forum, which is the lead partner for implementing some of the G20's SME financing and work. And we definitely recommend the report they've just issued on digital financial inclusion of women, youth and SMEs, issued under the Saudi presidency. So happy to send through more details on that later on. And I guess on the same note of global initiatives, Nana, can you talk about the ICC DSI initiative, which is obviously recently reported a new director, which is sponsored by the Asian Development Bank?
Sure, thank you. Launching of the Digital Standards Initiative, DSI, funded by ADB's Trade and Supply Chain Finance Program and the government of Singapore, is an important development during the pandemic on the digitalization front. This initiative is being housed at the International Chamber of Commerce, and DSI is a cross-industry effort to enable the standardization of digital trade. We believe that DSI is unique among the trade digitalization initiatives due to its collective nature. So too often digitalization is enacted through bilateral agreements between institutions that require members to run on the same platform, which resulted in a bespoke trade and trade finance processes. So the DSI seeks to coordinate all parties in the standardization of data formats and processes rather than duplicate existing efforts. The vision for DSI is to drive seamless digital trade through the entire trade ecosystem, from exporters to shipping, ports, customs, warehousing, finance, and importers. This would be transformational in our view on many levels. And we are excited about this initiative and will remain closely involved. ICC anticipates the implementation of a full time management team and the global and diverse steering committee to provide guidance and set priorities for this project. This will promote greater economic inclusion through the development of open trade standards. and will facilitate technical alignment among different blockchain-based networks and technology platforms that have entered into the trade space during these years. That's what we have in our mind, and of course we will keep the industry updated on the developments.
Thanks, Nana. And Chris, can you let's talk more about this, and more specifically, can you talk about your recent initiative, the ICC Digital Trade Roadmap?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to Nana, actually. I was just talking to Oswald Carlo, the MD of the Digital Standards Initiative this morning. You know, it's a really exciting project, and you know, an area that we've all been looking at for quite a long time. I mean, the Digital Trade Roadmap goes back, you know, a good couple of years now, and it was really designed and still remains as a sort of macro framework for all of us to be able to understand the three big pillars of work. One on legal reform, legal frameworks and policy frameworks. Those need to be modernized and updated, and in some cases put into place. Much of the world doesn't have data protection laws or consumer protection laws or competition laws. You know, all those sort of basic, you know, what I call building blocks need to be in place. Pillar 2 is really around interoperable standards, and that's the role of the Digital Standards Initiative, is to now start to connect the platforms so that there is more seamless, frictionless activity between the different initiative sectors, platforms, and activities. And then Pillar 3 is really much more around participation and adoption. That's about industry itself doing everything it can to take the opportunity to digitize. And again, I think actually COVID is a useful opportunity to do that. It's a moment in time when you can start to put in place the structures and systems and processes, not just for banks, but in the corporate and the SME community too, to really optimize use of the digital economy. And that means more market opportunities, more opportunities to trade, more platforms to use, etc. So, you know, the roadmap is there as a framework to use. It's there designed specifically for policymakers who generally don't understand what the particularly trade finance community talk about. It's very, very technical. It's full of jargon, and it's really important. If we want governments to modernize frameworks, then we've got to speak in a language they understand, in a framework which makes sense, and help guide through that process. And that's really ultimately what the key role of the roadmap is there to do.
Thanks, Chris. A very important framework there. Claire, let's talk about data. How can we use the numerous data points we now have to look at risk from a completely different perspective?
Sure, Deepesh. I mean, I've just talked about the work we're doing in Asia with our partners and the support of ADB, and similar work we've done across Africa. And hopefully that brings it alive in terms of, you know, we don't need big technological revolutions to happen. Data is there in front of us. It's really about kind of digitizing that and working collectively with the partners with a common aim. And I think that's the key. You know, George talked about we have to get away from working as individual contributors, because that's just has not got us where we needed to get to. So I think the power of the partnerships. Look, the tools and technology is there around data, right? We've had applied technologies. You think about, you know, using AI for intelligent credit decisioning and getting to fast decisions. We've got, you know, open banking here in Europe, and obviously taking off. That can give you access to companies' data and individuals in ways that we never had before. We talk about, and we very much believe in the creation of a corporate digital identity. Clearly, blockchain will be part of that. It's not going to happen overnight, but you've got to invest now to get us there in 12, 24, 36 months. So there are tactical, immediate opportunities to digitize, and there are strategic goals which we're all aiming for. But the key is we've got to do it collectively, and we've got to do it in steps and not wait for the big bang. And we've clearly evidenced that we can make a difference by coming together and doing things differently, and being a little bit more creative about how we do these things, and maybe taking a little bit more risk in how we're solutioning them. But I think the crisis is really creating the impetus to step on the pedal to, as a good crisis always does. You know, that creates the impetus, but also you see people being a lot more creative and innovative because it's necessity, and it has to be.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the work you're doing with Unilever and some of their smaller suppliers is really interesting, and that continuous innovative thinking is really important during times like this.